speaking of more Canadian news, you brought up McMaster, and this is very, very interesting. This came out of nowhere. I was surprised by this. A name that I barely knew. Dave Preston, the head coach of McMaster, named the head coach of the Australian men's national team. Boys, is this as random to you as an uneducated American like myself thinks it is?
No, I wouldn't think so. I've thought about this a lot in terms of how good we have it in North America in terms of our best coaches are coaching at the ages that they are. Because let's be honest, if we had pro leagues, guys like John Speraw and Alan Knipe, Ben Josephson, and of course Dave Preston would be coaching professionally. And I mean, Dave Josephson has a history of working with the national team going back to the 90s as an assistant coach with the men's national team, has been a head coach of the junior national team many times. He's been the head coach of a program that's finished top 3 in Canadian volleyball for well over a decade now. Just really one of the most dominant programs who have produced world-class players. I absolutely think that, he's the type of guy to come in and build a nice program and build a good base for a country like Australia. And I mean, I think Australia just kind of lacks maybe that fire sometimes, and they've worked with Lebedew for a long time. And I think after working with a coach for so long, you might turn a bit of a deaf ear to him. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Dave Preston brings to that team. But in terms of international volleyball pedigree, I think Dave Preston has it. I've gotten to know him on both on a professional level and a personal level. And, to me, he's one of the great volleyball minds that we have in this country, and undoubtedly a top 10 volleyball mind on this continent. So if there's anyone I think who would be deserving for an international job, I think it would be Dave Preston. I know that there's people in the Discord who even felt that, he might be deserving for the Team Canada job. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that we went the great direction with Ben Josephson. I definitely love to see the fact that Dave Preston is getting a shot at international volleyball.
Yeah, and I think one thing we have to keep in mind here is that you guys can disagree with me here if you want, but I think the level of coaching in North America overall is higher than the level of play from our players, 100%. If that makes sense.
I definitely agree with that.
I think they're like Everett mentioned, if we had a professional, there are a couple dozen coaches in North America, if not more, who could easily be coaching European teams. And, if there wasn't that barrier to entry, and let's be clear, there's a much bigger barrier to entry for coaching than playing in terms of going overseas.
Absolutely.
There would be, half the Polish and Italian league would be, I think, North American coaches if we were being completely fair here in terms of game plan, in terms of player development. So I agree that Dave Preston, great choice for this. So I'm kind of trying to understand where the Australian Federation is coming from, because they have a big hole to dig themselves out of, right? Let's be honest. They have very little talent coming through. They haven't had the last 4 or 5 classes coming out of Australia, haven't been that great. We have guys like Arash Dosanjh and Nehemi Omote. That's kind of the last couple of good players we've had in Australia. So hopefully they're bringing him in long-term, right? Let's really build from the ground up here in Australia, because I think they have good athletics. I think they have good athletes. I think there's potential there. We've seen in Canada, Australia, basically the same country on different sides of the world. So I think there's potential there for Australia to get to the place where Canada is. But I think it's going to be a long-term project, and I hope that there's not any expectation there for him in the next 5 to 6 years, because I don't think there's anything anybody could do with this current group of players to get them to, an Olympic top 10 worldwide kind of level.
Well said. He's going to need to really rebuild that thing from the ground up, exactly like Dan was talking about. The volleyball culture and development system in Australia needs to be rebuilt from the lowest junior levels to start producing players that can take the national team into that top 20-ish range in the world at least. And at that point, you start getting into some real tournaments and you can start to do some damage at that point, but they are just not there right now.
Well, I mean, I think Australia is still in VNL for this season. Are they not?
On technicalities.
On technicalities, but they're still there, right? It's going to be interesting too, because by the looks of it, he's going to be heading to coach the team this season, and come fall, he's going to return to McMaster to coach for the 22-23 season next year. So it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to allow him to do that double duty. And if he does, is it going to open up that portal for transfers coming in from Australia to McMaster? We've seen a lot of Australian players come and play, especially at Brandon University, a few at Calgary as well. We've seen some great guys come out of the Red Deer program as well. There's quite a few of those Australian guys on their national team who have come through the Canadian university system. But are we going to open that up a little bit more? I mean, hey, we had Wojtek Kraj, who came out of the JW system in Poland, who's currently playing for McMaster. So we know that they're open to bringing in international athletes. And I think that would be kind of, they don't have, it's very obvious they don't have the development level up to par in Australia, Rob, just as you mentioned. So I could definitely see that opening up, and especially not only at McMaster, but on other OUA schools where the international transfers aren't as plentiful maybe as out west.
It's a very, very good point. Going to be interesting to follow this national team season.